His Holy Spirit indwells us. Why don't we see more transformation? I wonder if we've short-circuited our own transformation, our own sanctification, because we have not brought the mind properly in.
Hey guys, this week on the Maven Parent Podcast, we are featuring a talk from our Maven conference in Southern California this spring that Brett gave, entitled A Practical Plan for Teaching Kids the Faith. This will be a 2-part series, and if you want to catch Brett's PowerPoint presentation with the talk but are just listening to the audio, you can catch that on our YouTube channel, Maven Truth. We hope you enjoy some of this exclusive conference content.
I really want to try and lay out a practical plan. I want this to be as practical as possible because I don't know about you, but I'm tired of hearing the stories. I'm tired of getting the emails. I'm tired of hearing that parent talk about their kid walking away. Not that I don't want to hear that from them. I'm tired of us losing kids and the next generation from the church. Got this email about, 6 months into starting Maven. This is an email from a pastor. This is the kind of thing that I don't want to hear. I'm not a pastor nor in ministry. I am a 53-year-old dad whose 25-year-old son, my best friend, told me 2 years ago he didn't believe in God anymore. That conversation changed my life. This same kid grew up in a Christian home, Christian school, vibrant church, fantastic youth group, and went on more than 10 impactful mission trips at home and abroad. How could this have happened? We are not immune here in the Bible Belt. And see, I think when I read that, it's tragic, but I thought, well, this guy's he would say, hey, I did the things I thought we were supposed to be doing. My kid was involved. So if my kid was this involved, what hope is there? Of course, it's not just the amount of activity. It's the kind of training that we're giving our young people. It's the kind of vision that we're giving them for the Christian life. Right? And we would say, well, what do we want our kids to walk out of our homes and our churches and our Christian schools with, right? We'd say we want them to love God. That's the great commandment, isn't it? The greatest commandment is to love God. But when we unpack that commandment, it helps us to see that loving God requires every single part of us. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. It's not merely an emotional response. It's not just an intellectual thing, but it's all that we are. But I think certainly when we look at the church, particularly in our context and in a Western context, what we find is that the church here is so anti-intellectual, that this piece, love the Lord your God with all of your mind, is missing. It's missing from the discipleship of not just our young people, but many of us never got that deep discipleship of the mind. But to love God requires bringing our mind into it. So think about it. I want my kids to walk out of my home loving God. But what does that look like? Does that just mean, they get emotional when we're at church? No, it also means that they have an intellectual love for God, which when you put it that way, actually makes some people in the church uncomfortable. Why is that the case? Because we're so anti-intellectual. That's just what Jesus says. Love the Lord your God with all of your mind. And here's the thing. This is not just a head thing. This impacts our transformation. I've wondered often if maybe when we look around the church, and even if we look into our own lives, and we sometimes, have you ever wondered, why don't we see more transformation? We are in relationship with the God of the universe. His Holy Spirit indwells us. Why don't we see more transformation? I wonder if we've short-circuited our own transformation, our own sanctification, because we have not brought the mind properly in to our view of the spiritual life. What does Paul say? Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by developing close emotional feelings for Jesus. Oh, wait. That's not the verse. Right? Don't be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed. What does Paul elevate here? Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And maybe we've short-circuited our discipleship and the discipleship of our young people because we have not brought the mind and God's truth deeper into the process of our sanctification and our discipleship. So what I want to talk about is how do we do that? And look, you got someone like a Dallas Willard, a brilliant philosopher, but who's also written great stuff on the spiritual life. And I think he captures a very important idea here when it comes to thinking about transformation and what we often depend upon to try and move people, right? If you look at popular Christian books and YouTube channels and authors, here's what they do. He says, today, by contrast, we commonly depend upon the emotional pull of stories and images to move people. We fail to understand that in the very nature of the human mind, emotion doesn't reliably generate belief or faith. If it generates it at all, not even seeing does unless you know what you are seeing. It is understanding, insight that generates belief. In vain do we try to change people's hearts or character by moving them to do things in ways that bypass their understanding. And so we can never, in the discipleship of the next generation, bypass their understanding, bypass their minds. And so for the rest of this time, I want to just give you a very practical, simple, 3-stage process for training the minds, which will affect the hearts of our young people. And you can find this in the chapter I wrote for a book that Sean edited called A New Kind of Apologist. And it's on just how do we train up the next generation. It was really working out that chapter for that book that I kind of laid out this practical 3-step plan. And for those of you who are familiar with classical education, you might be familiar with this 3-stage process. The first stage really deals with children who really birth through, let's say, around 4th grade, and that's generally speaking, right? That stage in classical education is called the grammar stage, right? And when it comes to the faith, here's what I think we need to focus on at that stage. It's teaching the what. It's teaching the what. It's the idea that at that stage of mental and cognitive development, our kids, our children need us to pour the truth into them. They need us to pour the truth into them again and again and again, even if they don't understand it. They need to be immersed in the truth. And if they don't understand it, that's okay. It still has value. And I think a lot of us need to step back and realize that putting our kids in that kind of environment where they're immersed in truth, and even if it's over their head, and even if it's deeper than we think they can grasp, is okay. Think about it. If you want to learn a language, or you want to teach your kid, let's say you're 10-month-old, right? You want to teach them how to speak in English. What do? Do you take them and then put them with a bunch of little kids, a bunch of 10-month-olds who are at that same level of development as them, and hope that if you put them together, that's going to be the most effective way to teach them? No, what do? You just immerse them in a surrounding where they're constantly being talked to in English. And, you're talking to that 10-month-old. Do they understand everything you say to them? Of course not. And in the same way, what we want to do is immerse our kids in this first step of just teaching them the truth, teaching them the what. We're pouring the truth into them. And then we add to that. So we don't stop, but then we add to it because we want to continue to teach the truth. The second step is then to teach them the why. This corresponds with that classical stage of logic, right? And helping our young people to not only know what they believe, but why they believe it. And then here's a third key step. This fits with the rhetoric stage of classical education. This is where we help them to learn the how-to. We teach the how-to. Okay, those are the three basic steps. Now, I want to cash those out. I want to give you some real practical resources on this. When we talk about this first stage, right, teach the what are we talking about? What's our what? Well, our what is our theology. That's the what. What does theology mean? Theos, God. Logos, the study of. Theology is the study of God. Very simple, right? That is the what. That is the primary what over all other whats. And so theology should be the area of study you are primarily concerned about with your children. And yes, I mean that theology takes precedence over biology. Theology takes precedence over chemistry. Theology takes precedence over all the other subjects that they're studying in their schooling. Now, it doesn't mean you do away with those things. In fact, we'll put them in the proper perspective by first understanding theology. So, very practically, here's one possible action step for you when you go home. If it's your own kids, or if it's your youth group, if you're a youth worker, I want you to do this test with your students. If you're at a Christian school, if you're a grandparent, do this with your grandkids. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to give your kid a theology test. And you simply say, hey, here's a piece of paper, here's a pen. I want you to list for me the attributes of God. So just list the attributes of God, as many as you can think of, right? In fact, you could do this right now in your notebook. Start listing out the attributes of God. And what kind of list would you come up with? So when I give this test to young people, typically now, giving it, I don't know how many times, typically we'll get students who will list maybe between 5 and 7 different attributes, okay? Now, after they've kind of taken the test and they get, a few of these up there, then I'll put up on the screen for them a list of 25. That if you go to a standard, systematic theology textbook, it'll list 20 to 25 attributes of God. So, of course, if you are only able to list 5 or 6 or 7, boy, that's a big group that you're missing. And is it just for the test's sake? No, of course not. What do these attributes tell us? These attributes tell us about who God is, right? I mean, it's kind of like if you said to me, hey, Brett, tell us about Erin. And I said, oh, yeah, my wife, Erin. Oh, Erin, she's 5'6". She's got blondish hair. She's got 2 eyeballs, And you laugh, right? You say, no. Come on, Brett, tell us about Erin. And I said, that's kind of all I got. Right? Now, from that, you would conclude some things probably about my relationship with her, wouldn't you? If that's all you can tell me. Now, is my relationship reducible to all the facts I can tell you about her? No, but it's nothing less than that. If I can't tell you these basic facts and attributes of my wife, you're going to say, okay, I bet that says something about your experience with her. Because we never want to divorce our knowledge of God with our experience, from our experience with him. In fact, I think one of the greatest things in my life that's helped me to go deeper in my experience of God is a theological study of the Trinity. And most of our young people don't know who God really is. They have a very shallow knowledge. But this is the most important subject. In fact, listen to how Charles Spurgeon, that great theologian from last century, how he describes theology. Listen to how he talks about theology. He says this: he who often thinks of God will have a larger mind than the man who simply plods around this narrow globe. The most excellent study for expanding the soul is the science of Christ and him crucified and the knowledge of the Godhead and the glorious Trinity. Nothing will so enlarge the intellect, nothing so magnify the whole soul of man as a devout, earnest, continued investigation of the great subject of the deity. Do you and I talk about theology like that? When's the last time you heard someone talk about theology in that kind of way? Theology needs to be the most important area of knowledge in our homes and in our lives. In fact, if you think about it, theology has a history in the Christian church that really helps us see the place of theology in the Christian church and in the Christian life. Now, I am having a little technical difficulty here because I can't see my PowerPoint anymore. There we go. I'm going to fly blind here. How many of you have heard the phrase Queen of the Sciences? Theology has been referred to as the Queen of the Sciences. The majority of us haven't heard that. What does that mean? That means theology is the queen of all areas of knowledge. And the medieval Christians held this view, and it's what gave rise to the university. It gave rise to the idea of the university. Take the two words that make up the word university, unity and diversity. And you put those together, you get university. What is it that brings unity to all the diverse areas and fields of study in the university? Well, medieval Christians said it was the Queen of the Sciences. It was theology, the one thing that can unite medicine and biology and chemistry and physics and English and every other area of study. The one thing that unites them all? Theology. God. God brings coherence to all of that. Why? Because this is God's world. And in God's world, anything you discover that is true is God's truth. And so when we teach our young people theology, it's not just, hey, here are the attributes of God. That's just the beginning. But it's, hey, what is your theological view of education? Right? What is your theological view of business? Some of us might be sitting here going, I didn't even know there was a theological view of business. Right? What is your theological view of, and list any other area in the university? Right? So take psychology, business, politics, you name it, history, psychology. Here's the key question. Do you and I, and do our kids think theologically? Do we think biblically? Do we think Christian worldviewishly, if that's even a word, about every single area of life? This is why theology is so fundamental. Now, look, how many of you are just right at the beginning? You're working with kids, or maybe you're the parent of kids that are just kind of at the beginning, like 2 years and younger. How many of you have kids 2 years and younger? Okay, great. You've got a head start, I think, by coming here. Because this process, I think there's a lot of parents that think that this process and teaching deep theology, well, that comes later. When they're in junior high and high school, that's when we really get deep with them. No, as soon as they start talking, you start this process. And if you start this process early, when they're a year old, 2 years old, they will be way ahead of the game. In fact, you'll be able to start the next steps earlier as well. And so here's what I want to do for those of you who, and for some of you said, okay, my kids are they're already old. They're out of my house. I'm past this stage. That's okay. You're probably going to have grandkids, right? If you don't already have them, or you can go serve in the children's ministry. I mean, this 3-step process is something that I think you can use, and Aaron and I have used in our home. We've used this framework in our youth ministry when we did youth ministry. We've used this framework in just our parachurch ministry. So I think you can use this framework in various contexts.
Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.